This is a tour that we did of Japan a few years ago, so I had to go back through the brochure and what have you to find out where we'd actually been. So it was quite good for me putting this together. Lynn and I, for quite a few years now, have decided that we quite like to see other parts of the world, and we quite like going on these tours where you have a small group and it's organised. And the advantage of that is that when you get to a place, the tour leader knows exactly what you're going to see and where you're going to stay and what have you. So you don't spend a whole lot of time trying to find out, you know, what the sites are and how to get there and how the buses work and everything like that. So we quite like it. We quite like the small groups because it gives you some company, and so far we've enjoyed the company of most of the people that we've been touring with. Occasionally you get somebody who doesn't fit in quite as well, but most of the time the company's been good as well, and we've made some good friends. Anyway, off to Japan. A very Japanese picture to start off with. They have these gates on temples, and that particular one they call them otoris, and that particular one is in the sea when the tide is in. So that's on the island of Miyajima. We'll come to that later on. So Japan is located, as you know, just the nearest country is South Korea, and there's quite a lot of affinity and also quite a lot of disaffinity between South Korea and Japan. And it's also quite near to China, Russia, and North Korea. And it's a whole chain of islands. And this is called a virtual tour of Japan, but in actual fact, it's a virtual tour of the main island of Japan, which is Honshu. We didn't go anywhere beyond Honshu. Okay, right. Anyway, so here were sort of some of the things. We went with a company called Kuoni, and we've used them before. And we had a lovely little guide called Sue. She called us, if she had a Japanese name, but she called herself Sue. So there's all the places that we went to, and I'll take you around all of them and tell you a little bit about them as we go by. We started off in Tokyo. And Tokyo is a big city. It's got lots of exciting attractions, very modern, very large, very sprawled out city. But the highlight of Tokyo, I think, was we went to a sumo temple for a religious blessing of the sumo fighters. So here they are, all trekking into the gathering that they had. I think Lynn particularly enjoyed this little session, particularly when they started going into the temple. So there they are. Then we went from Tokyo, we went up to Nikko. That was about as near as we got to where the nuclear disaster had been. It was just on the coast over here somewhere. And at Nikko, we saw some very interesting falls, and we saw the first of many, many temples that we saw while we were in Japan. This is an unusual temple in that it is both a Buddhist and a Shinto shrine. Japan has both of these religions. They tend to use them for different purposes. So they use one for living purposes, like getting married and things like that, and they use other one for spiritual purposes. But nonetheless, usually they're separate. So you have Shinto temples and you have Buddhist temples. And this particular shrine actually combines them both. It was a colossal amount of work involved in making it. They reckon 15,000 people built this shrine, and it took them 2 years to make it. It was built in the 1600s. The carving is just absolutely fantastic. People, when a shrine was set up, were expected to give money to it to contribute to the cost, but they could have a kind of cop-out. They could give instead a lantern, a decorative lantern, and obviously giving a lantern turns out to be cheaper than contributing to the cost of the shrine. So you find most of these Japanese shrines have got vast numbers of lanterns that they've made avenues of, and you can see some of them there lining the edge of the gravel area, these stone lanterns. But the wood carving was just absolutely fantastic. That is all carved out of solid wood, beautifully decorated, beautifully carved. The three monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, again in the carving on that particular temple. And the roof of that particular building is just absolutely amazing. Unnecessary structure just simply to produce these extremely well carved wood timbers. And again, you can see all the detail. There's dragons with people riding on them. There's a fish with somebody riding on it. A lot of detail. After we'd been to Nikko, we went to Hakone and the Mount Fuji region, round about Mount Fuji. We spent a few days there. The first thing we saw was the hot springs at Hakone. These are called Owaku Dani. Is the name of the place where the hot springs are, and it was a beautiful day. You can see just what the weather was like there. It was absolutely fantastic. And there's a kind of glimpse of the hot springs. There's quite a lot of hot springs in Japan. It's a very volcanic sort of area, and there are a lot of hot springs, and they fuel heated baths, which are very sexually segregated. You have the men's bath and the ladies' baths, and the two don't mix. And you are expected to bathe completely naked with only a towel, and you put the towel on your head so it doesn't get wet. And it also absorbs any drips that drip down from the ceiling, because the condensation tends to come down from the roof onto you and sit in the bath. So we went in quite a few of them, and this particular one was powered by the hot springs. As I say, the place is called Owakudani. We went on a long cable car there from Owakudani down to Lake Ashi, and there's quite a lot of lakes. That was our first view of Mount Fuji. So there's Mount Fuji with some snow on the top of it, and you can see there the sort of general arrangement. There's Lake Ashi, there's a place Owakudani where the hot springs are, and the Mount Fuji. And there's some stats there for the height of the lake. They have some phenomenal craft on the lake. We went on a modern boat, but they have these ancient sort of sailing ship type replicas for ferrying passengers on Lake Ashi. And there we are at the bottom of Mount Fuji. The day we decided to go up Mount Fuji, unfortunately, there was a lot of mist about, as you can see there. And it was quite a misty day. We didn't see much. But the day before, as you saw from the pictures, we had beautiful views of Mount Fuji. And the day after, we also had good pictures of Mount Fuji. Somebody else must have taken that, because I'm in it. I'm not in many of these photographs. So there was the day after. The next day, another beautiful sunny day, and a classic view of Mount Fuji with the cloud on top. And that is, again, a real picture of Mount Fuji taken that day, but that is a cheat. There's the Shinkansen, the fast train, and that was actually a poster on the railway station that I took there. But you can see it's very, very similar to that. It's a magnificent mountain, and the train service is a magnificent train service. We used it quite a lot for traveling about in Japan. We didn't fly very much. We usually took the high-speed train. So there it is. And the inside of the train is pretty well like most other trains, except that they have screens telling you how fast you're going. Pretty impressive. There are various different trains. The bullet train started in 1964, and there's now 1,800 miles of track in Japan. And the speeds go up to 200 miles per hour. So the fastest trains go at 200 miles per hour. It's an entirely separate railway system from the previous railways. So instead of trying to straighten out the tracks they had, they built a brand new set of tracks, 1,800 miles of that. From Mount Fuji, we went on to a place called Takayama. Very much enjoyed Takayama, very ancient place. This cat figure is a very, very frequent symbol in Japan, a waving cat. Also in China, there's a lot of similarities between the two countries. And these are some pictures of the high street in Takayama. And this is quite lovely, powered entirely by water power. You can see a little water wheel there, the water running down the side of the street, powering the automaton. And this was a shop selling sake, and of course, waving cats. Wherever you go, there's always shops selling sake and waving cats. They have the Japanese equivalent of the marches there. and they have these fantastic floats. They drag them out twice a year, and they parade through the streets of Takayama. And they are quite old. This particular one that you see there from the thing was built in 1764, I think they started. Very, very ornate, and they live in a kind of museum for most of the year, and then they get dragged out twice a year and parade the streets. They are carried, would you believe, or not carried, they're propelled, they've got wheels on them, they're pulled by people, and a lot of them have automatons on them. There's the one, a replica of one of the ones that was in our hotel, one of the floats, and you can see the sort of detail on them, absolutely fantastic. So we have to get one of them for the marches next year, I think. Some of our people also stayed in a Japanese guest house, a ryokan. We didn't actually stay in that. We stayed in a modern hotel, but this is the ryokan that some of the party decided to stay in while they were in Takayama. We then went on to this place called Shirakawa, or Shirakawa-go, and the north part of Japan, there are a lot of snow, and they have these thatched houses with very, very steep roofs. The reason for the steep roofs is in order to make sure that the snow doesn't stay on the roof if it slides off. And the Japanese authorities, because these were dying out, decided to congregate the ones that were left together and make a kind of almost tourist village. So some of these are in situ where they've always been, and some of them have been imported from other places just to preserve the style of houses. You can see the thatched roof, typically quite tall, 3 or 4 stories high, and they have silkworms in the roof, which they live there, and they spin silk is one of the crafts of the area. You can see there they're repairing the thatch on the roof. No nails at all tied together with rope, and that's the inside of the roof of one of the houses. Remarkable architecture. Also inside, the typical Japanese arrangement, the floor is covered with tatami mats, which are rice straw mats. They're a standard size, and I thought they were all the same size, but it depends upon what region of Japan you happen to be in as to what size the tatami mats are. They're always twice as long as they are wide, so these particular ones are 0.9 meters by 1.8 meters. And they're quite thick. I thought there were thin things you could roll up, but no, they're reasonably thick, about 6 millimeters thick, a couple of inches. And the modern ones have got a foam core, so you can buy tatami mats. They're still woven rice straw on the outside, but the middle of them is foam, which acts both as an insulator, so it keeps the cold off your feet, and it also makes it a pleasant surface to walk on. And nearly all Japanese rooms are laid out so that you can fit a number of tatami mats into them. And there are different patterns that they use for fitting them. They're also very, very sparse and minimalist in terms of furniture. You don't see a lot of furniture in Japanese homes. This was the old governor's house that we went to there, and you can see, again, the same sort of arrangement. These were audience rooms, tatami mats. This is the cooking fire, and they have a device for holding whatever's being heated above the fire. Some of the tatami mats, as you see, like these ones, have got fancy edges. They've got the borders on them. And a lot of Japanese gardens, these are very typical Japanese gardens. Topiary blossom, of course, we were there just at the time of the cherry blossom. And it varies, the season for cherry blossom in Japan, depending on how far north you are. And we were starting in the north and going south. So as we went south, the cherry blossom got more and more profuse. We then went to Kyoto. We spent a few days in Kyoto. The first thing that we saw in Kyoto was a temple, and I'm going to get it wrong, so let me look at this. We know it's here. It's called Kiyomizu-dera. It's a Buddhist temple, and it's a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. It was founded a long time ago, 778, And the massive building, this is the largest wooden building in the world, has got no nails in it at all. It's all held together by wooden pegs, wooden beams held together by pegs. This whole temple complex was built on the site of a spring, and the famous spring produced 3 flows of water, and these are meant to represent health, longevity, and success in studies. And you're meant to catch the water from the spring, and you can see these long cups they've got, and drink it, and you don't know which one's which, but you're going to get one of these 3 things. So whichever way around you do it is a benefit. And of course, Japanese are very suspicious, very superstitious, sorry, my apologies, very superstitious, but nonetheless, they enter into these things with great gusto and enthusiasm. And most of them were trying to capture a bit of water from all 3 of the springs so that they could manage to get all 3 of the virtues. There they are, capturing the water. We couldn't go to Japan without going to a Japanese tea ceremony. So here we are with the tea ceremony. Very, very ritualized. Young lady mixing up the green tea. And she has to do it. Every single movement is coordinated and preordained. And that was Sue, our group leader. You have to turn the bowl twice and then drink from it. So we all had a go at that. That's the young lady that did the tea for us. And Sue, who was our group leader. You can't go to Kyoto without going to see the Golden Pavilion. So that's the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto. I was slightly underwhelmed by the pavilion itself, but the gardens were absolutely lovely. I had really beautiful gardens round about it. And as you see, the blossom was just really coming to its best at that time. Really magnificent. There was also a very, very large bamboo forest there that we went to visit. There's nothing but bamboo trees as far as the eye could see. This is the, I suppose we would call it the red light district in English terms, but this is where the ladies that entertain you live. In Kyoto, they don't call them geishas. They call them, I can't remember what they're called now, call them gaikos, I think they call them, yes. And they have gaikos who are the trained ones, and they also have maikos who are trainee geishas. And the district's called Gion. So geishas are kind of Tokyo versions, and gaiko are there. So this was our maiko that entertained us dinner. She was very pretty. She was very, very polite, and she poured out the beer, served the food, and entertained us. That's what we had to eat. If you don't like tofu, then don't go to Japan, because you get a fair bit of tofu in Japan. And also raw fish, you get quite a lot of that. So that was her, just showing off her costume. And dancing for us. It's all very stylized. They spend 2 years in this apprenticeship as a maiko, and then they can eventually graduate and become a geiko. And again, typical Japanese food, raw fish and tofu. And we went on then to the area where near Hiroshima and Miyajima. That's the portal that I was telling you about before, the Otori at Miyajima. And there were goats roaming wild all over the place. Deer, sorry, my apologies, deer roaming wild. And they discovered how to work the infrared sensor on the door of the sweetie shop. If you moved around, you could get into the sweetie shop and make some stuff. And this is in the temple. These are barrels of sake. The Japanese, when they're making an offering to the temple, they buy sake and contribute it to the temple. Fortunately, sake lasts a long time, because most of the temples we visited had massive great stores of sake that people had donated. This was Hiroshima. You have kind of mixed feelings about Hiroshima. They made a very good job of preserving the site where the atom bomb went off. This is the memorial to the atom bomb, and you can see through it the famous bank building that is used as the symbol of the atom bomb in Hiroshima. We thought they'd handled it extremely well, that they had a big museum to it, and at no point did they attempt to put blame on either the Japanese or the Americans or anybody else for what happened. It was just a factual account of what took place and of the horrible devastation, and a kind of reminder to us all to be very careful about doing that sort of thing to each other if we can avoid it. So that's the A-bomb building. That was the only building really that was left standing in the centre of Hiroshima. There it is before it was bombed. This young lady had folded, she died of radiation poisoning, she folded cranes. And that's, the red thing represents where the bomb went off. And they have an eternal flame there in memory of the event. It was quite, I don't know, it was moving, Hiroshima. The whole of the centre of the city was flattened. But having said that, I think most of the buildings were built out of timber. They weren't very substantial buildings, but a vast number of people died. And they reckoned about 70,000 people died instantly when the bomb went off, and 166,000 people had died within a year. So a lot of them died of radiation problems. So colossal, sad thing, and it's good in a way that since the end of the Second World War, these weapons have existed in profusion, but they haven't been used again, and I hope they never are. We then went to Mount Koya. Mount Koya is a sacred holy site on the top of a mountain, and we stayed in a monastery there. I suspect it was a very touristy oriented monastery, but nonetheless, that's where we stayed. So that's the entrance to the monastery where we stayed. And they got us dressing up as if we were Japanese people and living on tatami mats and sleeping on the floor. So that was our room in the monastery. Paper walls, you'll notice, paper doors, tatami mats on the floor. Excuse the mess. And then we went and had a dinner. So that was all of our little party that we were with. I can't remember exactly how many of us there were, but there were about 8 of us, I think, altogether, plus the guide. And they love fish ponds and these Zen gardens where they just have gravel raked into beautiful shapes. And somebody has to come out with a rake and sort it out every time it gets damaged by rain or anything else. If you like that sort of thing, really beautiful. Went to a slightly odd place. This is the largest cemetery in Japan. And as you can see, Japan's a small country, and what of it there is largely mountainous and not inhabitable. So the people live in a fairly dense situation, as a result of which there isn't much space left for burials. And the cemetery was very crowded. An awful lot of the burial sites are corporate. A company will look after its executives and have a site in the cemetery for them, for their ashes. That was a space company that did rockets. They had one there. The other one was a sake company, the one before. That one there, that was a sake company that had that tomb. And they had these Buddhas that you had to splash with water. And sad, the children's graves are always decorated. Adult graves are just left as graves. Children's graves, they always put little clothes on them, typically red coloured clothing. And then we went, finally from there, we went to Osaka, which was the end of our thing. That's Osaka Castle. Osaka Castle was built in 1586, and you think, oh, that's magnificent. And then you go inside and you find there's elevators that take you up to the top floor. And it turns out that the castle was in fact reconstructed several times over. And 1931 was in fact the last time that Osaka Castle was reconstructed. And all you can say is that each time they reconstructed it, they built it exactly the same way as it was before. So that looks exactly the same way, apparently, as the original Osaka Castle in 1586. But it's very definitely not a 1586 building. The Japanese have this very pragmatic attitude to this with all their temples, an awful lot of ancient sites, are in fact reconstructions or rebuilds. A lot of them were built out of wood and they'd been destroyed by fire several times over the years. So there we were. That was us at the end of our trip. We very much enjoyed Japan. The people are lovely. They are exceptionally well behaved and polite and litter free. It's a country where you very, very rarely see a piece of litter. The food takes a wee bit getting used to. Lynn in particular, who doesn't like fish, found it quite hard sometimes to get sufficient nourishment that suited her palate. But it's very, very culturally very different. But if you've never been to Japan, then I recommend that you give it a thought once all of this dreadful situation disappears. So a wee bit video of Osaka Castle at the end. And beautifully decorated. And as you see, the blossom was really in full swing by that time. It really was lovely. So there you are, a quick tour of Japan. I hope you found that interesting, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have.